Thank you, Colin. And thank you, Tree, for inviting me here tonight. I'm going to read a selection of poems from Hermit Thrush. Some of you were at the launch, and so you may hear some poems for a second time. But what's wrong with hearing a poem a second time? The book begins with a short prologue, which is basically me trying to capture the definition of poetry using a butterfly net. There's music in the poem, but the poem is not music. There may be meaning in the poem, but the poem is not simply its meaning. There may be a cascade of language in the poem, but the poem is not simply language. The poem is all of these and none of these. The poem is a window thrown open, clouds parting, a shooting star. The poem is a minor spasm in a quiet corner of the heart, a peeling back at the edge of the universe, the revelation of a secret that looks suddenly familiar. The first poem that I'm going to read is called Book. I love books. I love reading them. I love writing them. I never had a book get angry or yell at me. Never had a book show disappointment in me or consider me stupid because I didn't understand a line or needed to reread a paragraph or didn't know a word. Never had a book mock me or look down on me. Never had a book turn its back on me or slap me in the face or fire me from reading it or decide it was in love with a faster, more intelligent, handsomer reader. I never even had a book get bored with me or question my logic. I never had a book look suddenly crestfallen because I shut it and left it on its own. I've never met a book too shy to come into the bathroom with me or under the covers. I never met a book that refused to read me to sleep. Thank you. There's a number of poems in this collection that I call list poems. These are poems where there's not necessarily a linear connection between the lines, but the lines cohere around a similar subject. So the first list poem I'm going to read is called The Seine and Its Bridges. And it begins with a quote from Guillaume Apollinaire, French poet, who lived in Paris in the turn of the 20th century, the early 1900s. And this line is from a famous poem by him called Zone, a wonderful poem, I think one of the great poems of the 20th century. The line is, "O Eiffel shepherdess, the flock of the bridges bleats this morning." So he's calling the Eiffel Tower shepherdess, and the bridges are sheep. The bridges over the Seine are sheep. And so I kind of took that and twisted it around and ran with it. The Seine and its bridges. The Seine, a flickering mermaid, captured and bound in bridges. The path of the Milky Way, each bridge a shooting star. The blood of Homer's Trojans, bridges as chapter headings. The voice of Piaf, each bridge a silent pause. The Seine, a pungent running cheese wrapped in string. A reflection in the roomy eyes of Baudelaire, one bridge for each slow blink. Time flows in one direction, each bridge counts another century. The endless sun, the inevitable cloudy days. The tears of human sorrow punctuated by sighs. A continuous longing relieved by the occasional poem. A lion tamer's whip, each bridge a lion in mid-leap. A film strip 700 kilometers long, each bridge an invisible splice. A hanging flower vine, each bridge a bee. A tongue that seldom ceases speaking, each bridge a moment's silence. A trail of cigarette smoke from a pausing flaneur, each bridge a glance at a girl. A female form reclining, here and there kiss after kiss. The long route of desire, each bridge desire's release. So I'll read a couple more short list poems. This one is simply called Metaphors and Similes. A monarch butterfly as large as a folded open paperback book. The old man's voice like dust trying to speak. A real marmalade of a traffic jam. The fire leaps like tabby cats fighting. A good stiff shot of January wind. A sound like a piano falling through the floor in a house on fire. The river twists and turns like a pinned snake. The branches of the spruce tree nod in the wind, saying, yes, yes, yes. A barcode of old fence. Tumbling consonants of thunder. The roof of the house just sits there like Buddha contemplating the sky. I hear a ticking clock in my head as if I am about to have a good idea. And the last of the list poems that I'll read tonight is called Liberation is as Simple as. And this kind of follows on an earlier poem in the collection called Liberation is as Difficult as. Liberation is as simple as ... An apple falling from a tree. A cloud dissolving into lofty blue. Thinking left, then turning left. Watching your hands peel an orange. The shadow of a hawk on the ground, lifting your eyes to the heavens. An erratic ant stumbling upon a grain of rice. A wave letting go at the shore. Smelling the first snow of the year. Letting your mind ripple with the rippling flag. Counting the stars one by one. Dumping a wheelbarrow full of air. This one is called Anatomy of a House, and well, I won't really say too much. It's called Anatomy of a House. In the shower stall, on a slatted shelf, lies a tongue of soap. In the kitchen, the lungs of the toaster breathe in and out, and in its satanic intervals, toast burns. The telephone, a fragment of skull, one left ear and a slim arc of jawbone connecting to a mouth. The cyclops eye of the TV dreams furiously when awake and reflects the house darkly while asleep. The couch, like a Florentine count, stretched out on his sarcophagus. Across from the chair, seated and straight as an Egyptian queen. The toilet squats, empty-headed, and every sink an open mouth, gulping water down its steely throat. In the library, each book the size of the human face. While back in the kitchen, the overexcited espresso pot orgasms into its own head. On the table waits the little round sugar bowl with its domesticated cap of a lid. And on the wall, the clock waves indecisive hands, never sure if it's saying hello or goodbye. There's a number of poems in this collection that are, I call them historical poems. They're based on something I've read in history and probably doing research on some novel or other. And, or in this particular case, it's because I went to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam and saw this particular object I'm going to talk about. And so there's a number of poems that are based on history. And a lot of my novels are historically based as well. So this particular poem is called Hugo Grotius Escapes. Hugo Grotius isn't very well known in North America anymore. He was Dutch and lived from 1583 to 1645. And I have a note here at the end of the poem. It says he entered university at 11 and laid the foundation for international law and freedom of the seas. He was imprisoned in Holland for promoting ideas considered seditious and heretical by those in power. His escape with his wife to France was successful. The book chest, which I'm going to talk about, the book chest of Hugo Grotius, is on display in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. So Hugo Grotius escapes. Hugo Grotius sits reading in Loevestein Castle, turning the pages under a cramped window that encases a minute segment of sky. Finishing the book, he slams it shut, packs it in the book chest, and retrieves a new tome to cheat the perpetual calendar of a life sentence. With Ulysses, he flees across smoking fields littered with Trojan dead. With Dante, slogs through the amphitheater of the Inferno, ponders ethics in the footsteps of Marcus Aurelius, a free man in Rome. He pauses to stare at the pine chest, leather straps and iron fittings, and wonders at the size of it. He smells the leather binding of the book in his hands. The odor reminds him of the saddle and bridle of his young horse as they raced by the sea. He grows dizzy, staring at the swirls and eddies of its end papers. As he opens the book, a note from his wife falls on the floor like a curlew settling on sand. When the bookseller arrives with her new chest of books and collects the old book chest, remove all the volumes and climb in. I have arranged our escape to France. Later, the servants at the straps will send up a quartet of complaints at the weight of the book chest as they haul it down the cobbles. So he escaped. A number of my poems have been influenced by traditional Chinese and Japanese poetry. There's a number of haiku in the book. I've always loved both Japanese and Chinese poetry. This next poem is called Poets of Old China. And in the great dynasties of China, when the great poets were writing, in the Tang and Song dynasty, which is, Tang is from about 600 to 900 AD, and the Song is from approximately 900 to 1300, it was typical that the scholars, who were the people who worked in the government, in the bureaucracy for the emperor, they were also poets, many of them. And when the power shifted, and these particular bureaucrats were thrown out, and new bureaucrats were brought in by the new power, these poets would head up into the mountains and live in exile and write poetry and do calligraphy. And then when power shifted again, they would come back down to the court and be in the bureaucracy again, and then the power would shift again, and they'd go back into the mountains, and so on. So poets of old China. Gentle eccentrics. They wore brocade robes in the city, rags in the mountains. Bureaucrat, hermit, bureaucrat again, hermit again. In and out of exile, riding donkeys up and down the peaks, from retreat to capital and back. In forest or court, they grew mad for language. Every stream a tongue never still. Every mountain a lovely woman's spread wide open heart. Old masters weaving with the sigh of wind in leaves, stunned by the view, drunk on ink. Second last poem I'm going to read from this volume is actually the last poem in the book. It's called Knock. No matter what regime is in power, you can always write poems about trees gathering sunlight in their arms, about the parliament of stars, or traffic yellow in the rain. No matter the time of day, day of week, your state of mind, or which of the manifold diseases is finding your organs a home in which to raise its children, you can still write poems about walking through the garden with a pair of hummingbirds for eyes, about the sun's interrogation of the moon, or what happened at the zoo. They might still come knocking at your door, having imagined all the wrong symbols in your poems, but you will have disappeared into the words. So the last poem I'm going to read is called Noah's House. And someone pointed out to me, quite rightly, that there were actually a pair of each animals. So I ask you to imagine that this particular house has a very large mirror in the front room that doubles all the animals that appear in this house. So Noah's House. And one of the reasons I like this poem is because I can gesture a lot with it. It would be useful to keep a giraffe around the house to reach those platters on a high shelf, and a lion to roar the children into dinner, and a tiger just to have some stripes strutting about. Why not a wildebeest to puncture cans, and a chimpanzee to bring in the mail and take out the garbage? I need a gorilla to guard the front door and help push the car when it refuses to start. And perhaps a colony of red ants to hide under a cushion as a joke when friends visit. And I'd love a giant python curling from one room to another so I can find my way in the dark when the power goes out. An ostrich would be intriguing for those great omelets, as well as a scapegoat to blame for all my problems and failures. And I wouldn't mind a small sphinx on the mantle so we can stare at each other sometimes and wonder. So because the other reader is sick and couldn't come, Colin asked that I go on a little further, and rather than read the entire collection of Hermit Thrush, I'll read from a couple other books, just a couple little pieces from each. The first one is from a book called Colorless Green Ideas Sleep Furiously, a title which absolutely no one can ever remember, including me. colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Actually it's a line from what's his name? A line from Noam Chomsky. Anyway, what I'm going to read from this, I'm going to read two short essays. They're very short. They're less than one page. No, one's a little more than a page. If I can find them. Okay, this one is called Troy Imagined. Troy Imagined. At the height of the Victorian era, the amateur German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann found Troy 7a, proving that the Trojan Wars were not fable, but a part of history, that the shield of Odysseus rang in the brilliance of real light, and Hector's legs hugged the back of a breathing horse. Certain scholars today question these findings. The historical veracity of the Trojan Wars is again under suspicion. I do not wish to become embroiled in this scholarly argument, but I would like to explore what this might suggest. What we have here in the back and forth between the fact and fiction of Troy and the Homeric epic, some of our earliest literature, is quite literally the profound power of the imagination, its ability to breathe life into matter. For thousands of years, a city of men and women peopled human imagination. For thousands of years, listeners heard the words of Homer, assembled the stone blocks of Troy in their imaginations, limned the face of Helen, struck the shields of 1,000 warriors. The tale had power. Its roots thrust ever deeper into the human fabric, into human soil. Each listener who heard or told the tale added to its depth, its profundity. One day a chiseled piece of half-buried stone appeared on the plains of northwestern Asia Minor, not far from the waves of the Thracian Sea, breaking over and over on the shore like lines of text. A portion of wall appeared out of the earth. This happened long before Schliemann arrived. A helmet with a skull inside glinted for a moment in the sun, then was covered by dust, moved by near and distant winds. And still people listened to the tale. Fathers told sons and daughters, older brothers told younger. People heard the tale repeat itself inside their own heads, listened to their own imaginations taking life. Meanwhile, the city of ruins was assembling itself on the plains. Tarnished shields appeared and poked out of the earth. Shards of pots, layers of paving stones, the point of a spear, all appeared and sank again under generations of soil and dust. Troy was imagined into existence and prepared for Schliemann's coming. A trader passed nearby once and saw nothing, though he sensed a certain power in the region, and fine words rose to the surface of his mind as he rode by. So I'll read a couple poems from an earlier book of poetry, Iron Mountain, my previous book of poetry, way back in 2001. A couple short poems. First one is called The Emperor's Poem. This is one of a series. This book is in particular very much influenced by Chinese poetry. The Emperor's Poem. The Iron Mountain towers above us, robed in mist. Its crags reach through the clouds into heaven. A single white waterfall seems to thread down from the sky in steps and fragments, and like the trail behind us, disappears the way we have come. I see my lieutenant ahead, alone on his horse. He reminds me of myself. Though I am the greatest emperor the world has ever known, the mountain towering above was here before I came, will remain when I have gone. The first heavy rain will obliterate our footprints and any sign of our passing. In 10 springs, 100, 1,000, this path will remain the signature of a traveler unknown, and the mist will continue to swirl and dissipate like poems breathed on air. And the last one I'll read from Iron Mountain, this collection, is called Villalobos, Lugs' Cello Through the Amazon Jungle. Villalobos was a great, I believe he was a Brazilian composer and musician of the 20th century. Villalobos lugs his cello through the Amazon jungle. Villalobos lugs his cello through the Amazon jungle. Where he started out is unimportant. Where he is headed, untraceable. No path threads the jungle together. But when he rests and plays, each leaf takes its perfect place. The brown and green river bends and never breaks. Songbirds, like shattered stained glass windows, drawn to the quivering sound, blink their green eyes and sharpen their yellow beaks, hoping to compete with the cello's music in the cool of evening. At night, the musician lays his body down inside the cello, feels hollow and trembly in his vine-draped dreams, the veins of his wrists like strings. He dreams an entire orchestra of night that by morning will be nothing but dew, its music lingering in the triple fan of leaves, in the breathing of umbrella trees. And I'll end the reading with a single poem that came to me too late to make the collection. And there's a reference to Frank Gehry, the architect who did the museum in Bilbao with the strange-shaped roof and all these angled things. Anyway, I was sitting in my chair in the living room one day looking out the window, and this poem came to me. Gehry Butterfly. The way a butterfly flickers back and forth across the backyard, all kind of spastic-like, but soft, as if a small cloud's flapping its wings, as if a suede glove's cut up and reassembled according to the wacky rules of Gehry origami, a tiny little opera house planet in its own quirky orbit.